Well, good morning, El Paso Bible Church, and welcome to our Sunday School hour for this Sunday. We're going to continue on this morning in Daniel. We've been progressing somewhat rapidly, in my opinion. We could be going a lot slower through the book of Daniel, ultimately in preparation for teaching through the book of Revelation. But we are in Daniel chapter 5 currently. And so if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them up. I encourage you to get your Bibles because we will be using them. So you'll need to be able to follow along with the text. Here in Daniel chapter 5, beginning in verse 1, it says this: Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. So you might be asking, who's this Belshazzar guy and where did he come from? Because last time we were talking about Nebuchadnezzar. And in fact, the very last words that we looked at was really about the restoration of Nebuchadnezzar. You'll remember that he spent 7 years, and we read that in just a few words, but think about that, 7 years living out in the fields like an animal without his reason, having basically lost his mind. And having been restored to his former glory after that 7-year period when he essentially repented and acknowledged that God is who he is and what God had done in his life. And Nebuchadnezzar was a long-term ruler. He ruled for 43 years, which was really, frankly, it's very, very unusual in any monarchy to have a reign of 43 years. But certainly in the ancient Near Eastern world, 43 years is an exceptionally long career. Usually you get killed or you get bumped off or you get sick or you die in battle. I mean, that just happens. But Nebuchadnezzar is essentially Belshazzar's grandfather. But after Nebuchadnezzar died in 562, after really elevating the glory of the kingdom of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, the family tree is a little bit rough here at this point. He actually has a son named Evil Merodach. Now, I don't know what your naming rubric is for your children. I sometimes play a little joke here in my children's names, but all of them actually are biblical and have a wonderful meaning in Scripture. I'm not sure what you have to do to get a son who's named Evil Merodach. I've thought about naming other people's children evil, but I wouldn't do that to my own son. But Nebuchadnezzar has a son named this, and he rules for 2 years. And you know, if your name is Evil Merodach, you shouldn't be surprised that somebody murders you after a couple of years. And it's his brother-in-law, in fact, who does this, named Neriglissar in 560 BC. So now the family tree has shifted slightly. The ruler is now technically outside the bloodline of Nebuchadnezzar. It's this guy, Neriglissar, ruled for 4 years. He is succeeded by his son, who rules for 2 months, who is then succeeded by a man named Nabonidus, who rules for 17 years. Of those 17 years, Nabonidus spends 10 years outside of the city of Babylon, outside of the central portion of his kingdom, of his country. But he was relatively successful. He restored a lot of things that had been destroyed in the political volatility that had followed Nebuchadnezzar's death. But he was gone. Now, I won't make any comment as to the benefits that a kingdom experiences when the king is not actively ruling. Here in Texas, we have a legislature that only meets for a few days every couple of years, and they still do a lot of damage. As they say, your life, liberty, and property are only safe when the legislature is adjourned. And that extends to other forms of government. I think part of the success that Nabonidus experienced had to do with his absence and not his presence. But he does have his son, Belshazzar, here, who has been named as co-regent. And being the co-regent, he was referred to in this text as king, evidently in Nabonidus' absence, because we don't see him here in this text. And during this time, while he's absent and when Belshazzar is essentially ruling over Babylon, Persia has laid siege to Babylon. Now, this is a common situation, and most ancient cities of any size or any wealth would prepare for this. And in fact, we read in other sources that Babylon had what was presumed to be and considered to be 20 years worth of supplies in the city walls for the sake of their own security. Now, given the events that are going on currently, You may have realized, maybe something you didn't realize before, but our supply chain is very volatile. It is disrupted quite easily just by people buying a little extra of this and a little extra of that. On the best case scenario, our grocery stores have only 3 days worth of stuff in them for most things. I mean, most basic staple items that are commodities, they come in and out pretty quick. They need to do that because they'll go bad, that kind of thing. 3 days. So having 20 years worth of supplies is seriously confidence-inspiring in this kingdom and in this empire that Belshazzar is ruling over. So that's a great thing. A wise ruler does things like that. But Belshazzar is not the wise ruler that did this. Belshazzar is a dummy. We're going to see that. I've titled this section Belshazzar's Drinking Game because it seems like that's what he has now. We hesitate to use the words quarantine and lockdown, but let's be honest. This guy is in lockdown because he's under siege by another very large, very powerful empire that is rising quickly. And so he is stuck inside his walls, and he's having a little drinking game here. That's what this says. Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. Meaning he just called up 1,000 of his best buddies to watch him drink. Now, I don't know if that meets the technical definition of a drinking game. I don't engage in them. But it sure sounds like it. This is entertainment. This is drinking for entertainment's sake. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, verse 2, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So he decides, presumably after drinking a little bit, I guess, that this is a good idea, that he's supposed to now, everybody's going to drink together. We're done watching Belshazzar drink, 1,000 people watching one guy drink. Isn't that sad sounding? I mean, if you're going to drink at all, drink by yourself in front of 1,000 people. I think that's a way to inspire pity and not awe. But that's what he's doing. But now he decides to go get the vessels there that are in storage, have been there since his grandfather's time. And he's throwing this party, we think, probably to show contempt to his enemies. Say, hey, look, y'all sit out there all you want. We got 20 years worth of goodies in here. I'm going to throw a party. Y'all do what you want. You stay or go, whatever. But he takes it a little bit far because now he's no longer showing contempt for his human enemies. He's showing contempt for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, the God of Daniel, of Shadrach, of Meshach, and Abednego, who had blessed this empire and this kingdom greatly throughout multiple generations, but certainly in Nebuchadnezzar's time. So he brings all these things so everybody can drink together. And they're going to have an idolatrous worship service. That's what they're going to have. He wants so that they can drink together. And it says here, his wives, his concubines, he's a polygamist. And then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. This is basic. This is very, very basic pagan behavior. You're going to worship anything you can hold in your hand or touch with your fingers. Anything that you ascribe value to. These things are just objects. They're created things. They actually have no value, except that they're shiny in most cases. We talk about the fiat currency that we operate on here in most modern economies. But let's be honest, gold and silver don't really have a lot of value either, except by fiat, by declaration. And so they've elevated this beyond just ascribing value to them, but ascribing deity to these idols. With the consecrated vessels from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had taken them because they were of value, but they were in his storage shed. They were consecrated items, but he wasn't using them in his worship. It doesn't appear at any time. Belshazzar plays the stupid game and is going to win the stupid prize here. And that's what I've called the next section here. First, we had Belshazzar's drinking game. And now we have this section here in verses 5 to 9 called Play Stupid Games, Win Stupid Prizes. So as they're drinking all together, they're worshiping, they're having this idolatrous worship service with consecrated Yahwistic, how you like that word, Yahwistic. I will give you 5 extra points if you can spell that. Send it on to me if you want to. Yahwistic items from the temple, things that were consecrated to serve the true God, the one true God, most high above all, whether you're in Babylon or Jerusalem, and they're worshiping idols with it. But suddenly, as they're in the middle of this stupid game, they're about to win the stupid prize. Verse 5, suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand, just as a little illuminated spot. You've probably seen a depiction of this, on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the back of the hand. So in other words, the writing was probably obscured at that moment. It's one of the issues. One of the reasons we write left to right in English is because you don't obscure the writing as you go. Most cultures that write right to left, as is true of Semitic languages, you end up obscuring the writing. And in fact, depending on the medium, you will actually rub it out as you go if you're not careful. The Chinese, of course, fix this problem. A lot of Asian languages go up and down, and they fix that problem. But there's this direction, right to left, is weird. So you see in the back of the hand, it's obscured. You can't see it. And so it's writing a message here. Lamps on this plaster wall of the king's palace. And then the king's face, this is verse 6. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. Like, literally, he's as scared can be. Because he's playing a stupid game. He's about to win a stupid prize. Now, talking about stupid games and stupid prizes, yesterday, my youngest son, Hank, we call him Hank, asked me, Dad, would you come and jump on the trampoline with me? Now, talk about stupid games. I'm a 41-year-old male. I'm a little over 6.5 feet tall and umpteen number of pounds. And my youngest son, 9 years old, wants me to go jump on the trampoline. You might say, Pastor Josh, that sounds like a stupid game. And you might win a stupid prize. And you would be correct. It was pretty good fun. But I'll tell you what, my knees are feeling it today. They're knocking. I'm not scared, but I don't like that feeling. They just feel a little bit stressed out today after a few minutes on the trampoline with Hank. But his knees are knocking. He has, I believe, understood the nature of the stupid game that he is playing. So then he calls out. He's only got one solution to this. There's only one solution in Babylon to these weird things. Verse 7, the king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners, because that's what you do if you've got a problem. You call in the magicians, the Chaldeans, and the conjurers. The Chaldeans and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. Now remember that Belshazzar is not actually he's not the big king. He's the co-regent with the king. Meaning Nabonidus has first chair, he has second chair, and the most that he can offer is the third chair in the kingdom. And he's willing to offer that to somebody that can tell him what's going on as his knees are knocking and his hips aren't working. Any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. So then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. So we know we're playing a stupid game, but we haven't figured out what the stupid prize is yet. They all came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known to its interpretation to the king. So then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. I mean, his knees are knocking, his hips are like, he's scared to death. He's probably never felt this scared in his life. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. Now remember, these are all a bunch of drunks. I mean, drunks scare pretty easy, but this is scary stuff. So then the queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles. And the queen spoke and said, O king, here it is again, O king, live forever. Live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. That's full of bad advice, right? He knows he's playing a stupid game. He knows he's going to win a stupid prize. He knows he's not going to live forever. But this is what the queen, now this is probably his mother or his grandmother, the queen mother or the queen grandmother, is that a thing? Because she knows a lot of information firsthand that would not really be relevant to Belshazzar. Also, the text says that Belshazzar's wives and concubines are right there with him, playing the stupid game, about to win the stupid prize. But the queen says this, whether it's his mother or his grandmother, we're not sure, but there is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, right, they refer to their ancestors as fathers, no matter how many generations there were. In the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. There's a lot of confidence in this guy. She seems to have seen, not just heard what had happened, not just read about it in a scroll somewhere, although those were obviously there. The records of the monarchy, of the empire here. So verse 13 says this, right? Daniel is called in. Now remember, Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, they were pretty friendly, right? When Nebuchadnezzar had the dream or the vision of the tree, right? And it was good, and it provided food and shade for everybody. It provided for the nations, for all the people. And then it was chopped down, and it was bound in bronze and iron. And it was, what were his first words? King, I wish this was a dream about people who hate you. I wish this was a dream about your enemies. I wish the interpretation applied to them, but it doesn't. At the very least, he had some concern and some care for Nebuchadnezzar. We don't really get that feeling here when Daniel's talking to Belshazzar. Then Daniel was brought in before the king, it says in verse 13. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel?" As if there's a bunch of Daniels running around in Babylon. I mean, even Daniel has a Babylonian name. "Are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah?" Now, he doesn't wait for the answer. "Now I have heard about you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you." Puts words together pretty good for a drunk. "Just now, the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message." Now, we can see the inscription. We know how it got there. We haven't really moved from this spot. It's there, but we can't understand it. We don't know what it means. We don't even know what it says. But verse 16 says, "I personally have heard about you," in the last, 5 minutes, "that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you are able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as third ruler in the kingdom." This is going to be important later. Daniel becomes the third ruler in the kingdom. Daniel takes this third chair. And Daniel answered and said before the king, "Keep your gifts to yourself." I like this guy. "Keep your gifts to yourself and give your rewards to someone else." There's a little contempt. A little contempt. "However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. O King, the Most High God, granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished, he killed." A mark of a glorious, grandeur-ridden king, huh? "Whomever he wished, he killed. Whomever he wished, he spared alive, and whomever he wished, he elevated, and whomever he wished, he humbled." In other words, God gave him far-reaching sovereignty, gave him a lot of freedom to do what he thought was best, and he was good at what he did. We've been over that, right? Nebuchadnezzar was not a bad king. He was a very adept, able ruler, aside from his occasional outbursts and tantrums. He did whatever he wanted within the confines that God had given him of this sovereignty, grandeur, and glory. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of beasts, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. Wild donkeys. They smell. I've spent a good bit of time in past years around donkeys. Wild donkeys on mission trips and things like that. This isn't pleasant. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. He had to learn this lesson, Belshazzar. He learned it the hard way. And if you remember back in chapter 4 when we talked about learning this lesson the hard way, the angelic watcher says this is in order that all the living may know who God is and what place he occupies in this creation. He occupies the top spot, and he doesn't share it with anybody, and he doesn't tolerate people who want to share it. Isn't that a recurring theme through Scripture? He doesn't share that spot. Yet you, his son, verse 22 here, yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. Even though it's familiar. It's part of your history class. It's like Texas history in Texas, right? We got a lot of unique history. We learn it all, and then we do a lot of dumb things. We remake all the mistakes over and over again. And Belshazzar saying, you're making the same dumb mistakes. You played the same stupid game. You're going to win a stupid prize. It may not be the same stupid prize, but this is a stupid game. You have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. They don't give two figs what you do with them, to them, for them, in front of them. They have no perception. But the God in whose hand are your life breath, the one that is keeping your heart pumping every second, every moment of your life, the one who's making your lungs work, who's keeping your brain firing, the one who's in charge of every last aspect of your life, and all your ways you have not glorified. You played a stupid game, Belshazzar. You played a pretty dumb game here. Then the hand was sent from him. You didn't warrant a personal appearance, Belshazzar. You just got the finger. The finger, right? Then the hand was sent from him. And this inscription was written out. This is the inscription that was written out. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. I met a guy once who had that tattooed on his forearm. I don't think he understood the interpretation either. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. It's done. The days are numbered. It's not some future thing. Nebuchadnezzar was told your kingdom is going to end. It's going to end a little bit badly. This is going to be bad for Babylon, how it's going to end. But Nebuchadnezzar saw that in the future. And Belshazzar gets to hear this future is now. This is what's going to happen now. Your kingdom has been numbered, and God's going to put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. That means it's your fault, Belshazzar. This event didn't have to take place necessarily this day, but this is your fault. You played a stupid game. You won the stupid prize. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Doesn't matter you got 20 years worth of groceries. Doesn't matter that you felt comfortable having a party with all these Persians outside your walls. It doesn't matter how big your walls are. Your kingdom has been divided and given over to them. Now, to his credit, Belshazzar keeps his promise before he gets killed. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. I told you we were going to talk a little bit about that. Now, it was normal quite normal in these situations to remove the king. When the kingdom was overtaken, on occasion you read that the kings just have to swear fealty and they become a vassal state, but it was fairly common as well to remove the king. If Daniel had been elevated above the third chair, he might have been subject to removal himself. But as it is, we have a Hebrew, an Israelite, a Jew, who because of his faithful exercise of the gifts that God has given them, even in a pagan environment towards pagan kings over multiple generations here at this point, has been elevated and preserved within that pagan kingdom, even during a transition. Now, many of y'all probably have survived transitions in jobs before, and you know that that's not a given. In any transition, there's turmoil, and people are dismissed, people get removed. And it's amazing preservation of God in the life of Daniel that he makes this jump. He goes from being the third ruler in the kingdom of Babylon. And that same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. That very night. Now, let me tell you something. When God says that your kingdom is ended, your kingdom is numbered, and he's put an end to it, this was immediate. That very night that was taking place. Well, he decided to have a party. They decided that a drinking game was appropriate with all this army outside of his walls and 20 years of groceries. When God makes that decision, he is sovereign over it. And he's going to exercise it according to his good pleasure. And his good pleasure was that Belshazzar, the co-regent king of Babylon, would be removed that night. And so we read that Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. And Daniel makes that transition with them. So we'll continue on into chapter 6 here next week, but I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Again, if you have any questions, since we don't have any live interaction, you can send that to me either by email, through Facebook Messenger, however you want to do it, or by comments directly on this video. We'll see you next time.